The movie begins with a postman delivering letters to remote homes in the middle of a forest. He arrives at a house where a woman is washing blood-stained clothes. He knocks on the door, but the woman does not hear him because she is listening to loud music. At this moment, the postman suddenly notices creaking noises coming from the house's basement. Thinking someone is trapped inside, he opens a wooden cover and tries to help. Unfortunately, he is abruptly dragged inside by an unseen force. The scene then shifts to 30 years later, when a group of teenagers are heading to a forest for camping. This trip is called Offline Vacation, where these children are sent by their parents because of their addiction to the internet and gadgets. Upon their arrival, the manager greets them and says that this is their golden opportunity to overcome their addiction and get close to nature. I'd bet money that not a single one of these children give a shit about that. The 50 teenagers are divided into teams with a guardian assigned to each group. They are then forced to turn in their phones and prepare for their journey. In a forest cabin, we see the same woman from 30 years ago, but she's much older now. She has hunted a deer and is trying to drag it into the basement. Unfortunately, she ends up slipping and falling into the basement. Moments later, a monstrous creature appears and kills the woman in an instant. In the next scene, the teenagers are getting ready for a 3-day hike in the woods. We then see Counselor Isa's group, which includes 5 kids: quiet Zosia, athletic Daniel, frivolous blonde Anelia, gamer Julik, and a gay boy named Bartek. Before they leave, a local priest arrives in a fancy car and greets everyone. "Hello, children. I'll be touching some of you, probably." He states that modern technology is the biggest threat to their kids and hopes that they will overcome their addiction. He prays for the teenagers and also sprinkles holy water on their cell phones and their laptops. Now they don't work. Next, Isa's group sets off for camping, and during this time, Julik shows interest in Zosia. He says that her necklace reminds him of the Terminator T-800. Whew, Riz Daddy. This makes her chuckle, and she reveals that it's her family memento. Meanwhile, Daniel attempts to flirt with Anelia but is constantly interrupted by Bartek. Irritated, he begins to insult him by making homophobic comments. The two then get into a physical fight, and Daniel ends up pushing Bartek to the ground, injuring his leg. Fortunately, before the matter can escalate further, the others intervene and separate them. Moments later, when Julik goes to relieve himself at a distance, he comes across a torn deer carcass. Thinking that a large animal is nearby, he gets scared and summons everyone to investigate, but Isa explains that it's just a trap set by the poachers and instructs them to continue walking. Zosia then looks around and catches a glimpse of an unusual hand near a tree. This terrifies her, but she remains quiet and doesn't tell anyone. Maybe this is just what life is like when you don't have internet. Later, the group sets up their camp in the middle of the woods. They then sit around a fire and start sharing about their lives. Julik reveals that he's a gamer and has a YouTube channel with 1 million subscribers. It's friggin' awesome. He used to skip school often to play games, which made his parents furious. He further explains that he was about to go to Korea for a competition with a reward of $500,000. However, his parents refused and sent him on this camping trip instead. At night, everyone goes to sleep, but Daniel feels restless, so he heads to a nearby lake to smoke. Anelia joins him shortly after, and she starts smoking as well. The two then begin flirting, and during their conversation, Anelia discovers that he is still a virgin. She decides to give him the best night of his life and gets intimate with him. Can't do this on TikTok. After they finish, Anelia returns to her tent while Daniel retrieves a phone he had hidden in his clothes. He starts swiping through girls on a dating app, unaware that someone is lurking behind him. Seconds later, a huge man with boils all over his body appears and attacks Daniel. He eventually kills the teenager by repeatedly slamming his body against a tree.
No phones allowed.
In the following scene, we see Zosia on a road trip with her family, looking very happy. She is playing with her sister in the back seat while her father takes a selfie with her mother. Because of this distraction, their car is involved in a fatal accident. Just then, Zosia awakens from a nightmare, and it appears that her entire family died in that accident. Afterward, the group prepares for another day of hiking, but they cannot find Daniel. Everyone becomes concerned, and Anelia mentions that she saw him at the lake last night. She explains that they talked for a while before she went back to her tent. When they get to the lake, they fail to find him, but instead see bloodstains on the tree. The teenagers begin to panic, but Isa reassures them that it's not blood, but rather tree sap. After this, she declares that they must split up and search for Daniel. Julik is terrified and mentions how, in horror films, everyone dies when the group disperses. He suggests that they stay together, but everyone ignores his advice. Isa, Zosia, and Julik then leave to look for Daniel, while the other two remain behind in case he returns. Shortly after, the trio arrives at the house seen at the start of the film. They decide to enter to seek help, but find no one there. They then start snooping around and eventually venture into the basement, where they are horrified to discover several corpses, including Daniels. Before they can do anything, the huge man arrives at the house, forcing the group to close the basement door and hide. Julik almost vomits from the disgusting smell, but Isa stops him. Moments later, the killer enters the basement and the group desperately tries to flee through the window. Zosia and Julik are able to escape, but when Isa tries to leave, she notices Daniel's phone ringing in his pocket. Determined to get the device, she stays behind and prepares to fight the monster. Sadly, this turns out to be a grave mistake, as the killer easily overpowers Isa. He then decapitates her and throws her head at Zosia and Julik's feet. Horrified, the two immediately run away from there. Meanwhile, Anelia and Bartek are talking by the lake, and he confides in her about the struggles of being gay in such a homophobic town. Anelia also discusses her own struggles, such as how everyone thinks she is a dumb and easy woman. As they are engrossed in conversation, the killer suddenly appears and thrusts a metal rod into Anelia's head from behind. This kills her on the spot. To counter her point from earlier, that was kind of easy, while the terrified Bartek runs away from there and eventually arrives at a church. Elsewhere, Julik and Zosia stumble upon a house in the middle of the forest where they encounter an old man. The man invites them inside and the duo informs him about a deformed monster who killed their friends. They begin to panic and ask for a phone so they can call the police. However, the old man calms them down and states that he doesn't have a phone. It is then revealed that he is the postman who was attacked 30 years earlier. He lost his legs in the incident, but somehow managed to escape. He then reveals that there are not one, but two giant killers. They are twin brothers who were once normal kids, but one day, while playing in the forest, they found a strange stone in the wreckage of a crashed plane. The twins took the stone and brought it home. At night, a dark liquid emerged from the stone and entered the twins' bodies, transforming them into savage carnivores. Their mother awoke the next morning to the horrifying sight of her sons eating their dog.
Tastes like chicken, Mommy.
She then confined them to the basement and hunted animals to feed them. After saying this, the old man suggests that they stay there because he has weapons and food. Julik believes it's a good idea. However, Zosia insists that they cannot simply stay without doing anything. She decides to retrieve Daniel's phone and call the cops, leaving Julik with no choice but to follow her. Elsewhere, Bartek runs into the priest we saw earlier in the movie. He frantically explains the whole story and asks for a phone to call the cops. The priest claims that he has a phone, but there's no signal in this area. However, seconds later, the telephone begins ringing, exposing his deception.
Whoops. Friggin' 5G.
The priest then swiftly strikes Bartek in the head, knocking him out. A while later, Bartek awakens to find himself tied to a chair and gagged. The priest sits in front of him and claims to know Bartek from when he first arrived last year. He insults him for his sexual orientation and claims that people like him are harmful to society. Just then, the priest hears noises outside and goes to investigate. He is suddenly approached by the deformed killer, who crushes his skull and murders him. The killer then uses a wood chipper to shred the priest's body into pieces. Holy crap. Inside the church, Bartek manages to free himself from his ties. When he hears someone approaching, he tries to hide in the confessional box, but gets discovered by the killer. Meanwhile, the other two teenagers arrive at the killer's house to retrieve the phone. The plan is simple. Julik has to distract the killer with some noise, while Zosia sneaks into the basement to grab the phone. Before leaving, she hands him a knife for protection and also kisses him. This boosts Julik's confidence so much that he goes to the front door and challenges the monster to come out. The killer soon shows up, and Julik clumsily tries to fight with him. Meanwhile, Zosia heads to the basement and searches for Daniel's phone. She eventually finds it, but soon realizes that the killer is now staring at her. Just when it appears she is going to meet her demise, Julik arrives and stabs the monster, but it seems to have no impact on his mutant body. The killer tosses Zosia aside, rendering her unconscious. He then turns his attention to Julik and brutally bites the flesh off of his face. While unconscious, Zosia again dreams of the accident involving her family. She witnesses her father surviving the accident but being gravely injured. He is panting and pleading for help, but despite her best efforts, Zosia cannot help her father. Just then, she awakens in the basement and discovers herself chained. She notices Julik nearby, badly injured with a knife stabbed into his abdomen. She then pulls Daniel's phone from her pocket, but it quickly runs out of battery and turns off. Feeling helpless, Julik asks her to finish him off, saying he can't bear the pain anymore. Zosia then sobs and reluctantly twists the knife into his abdomen, putting an end to his suffering. Following this, she uses the knife to unchain herself and break free. At first, Zosia thinks of escaping out of the basement window, but as she remembers all of her dead friends, she realizes that she can't just leave without confronting these monsters. Why? Upstairs, Zosia finds a giant machete lying in the room and grabs it. She notices one of the twins snoring in bed and realizes the other is not at home. Filled with vengeance, Zosia stabs the monster repeatedly until he finally stops moving. She then gets out of the place, face and runs away. Meanwhile, the old postman is inside his house when someone knocks on the door. Assuming it must be the twins, he grabs his gun and fires several times at the door. But when he goes to check, he discovers Bartek's corpse, who had actually escaped the killer's clutches and was trying to find his way back to safety. You can tell he spent time in that confessional box, because now he's holy too. Elsewhere, Zosia runs through the forest for hours and finally comes across a policeman. She is so traumatized that she fails to explain the entire situation. However, the cop notices her distress and embraces her. The two then begin to drive away, but soon come across one of the killers lying on the road. The cop assumes someone is dead and exits the car to investigate, despite Zosia's pleas not to. When the cop sees the monster move, he pulls out his gun and attempts to shoot, but before he can do it, the killer easily chops him with an axe, resulting in a painful death. He then gets on top of the car, attempting to stab Zosia, but she manages to reach the driver's seat and start the car in the nick of time. This tosses the monster to the ground, and Zosia uses the opportunity to run him over multiple times. After being convinced that he is actually dead, she drives away from there. In the final scene, two drunkards come across the monster lying on the road at night. Surprisingly, he is still alive and somehow manages to get up. At home, it is revealed that his brother also survived the stabbings. He then gets up from his bed and looks at the police lights outside his house.
Oh shit, it's the Popo!
Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.